Ready when you are.
Good morning, everyone. I just want to say welcome to our webinar on the Resurgence 2 program. My name is Dr. Eloisa Clementich. I pretty much know everyone. I just want to thank you specifically for joining this call. What we wanted to do this morning is, first off, and always wish you a wonderful, beautiful Friday, but thank you for your continued partnership. We can't do this alone. And so we specifically wanted to create this opportunity in this venue to walk through the Resurgence 2 grant program with you, and then also talk about some of the challenges that we've seen some businesses have and just highlight them to you, because we suspect that many of our businesses are going to come to you asking for your support. So this really, the effort of this is to give you an insight into the application. What are some of the challenges we saw, and what are some of the things you may be, you may see in terms of businesses approaching you. So we didn't want you caught off guard. Want to make sure you're fully aware of what opportunities are out there for the businesses in the city of Atlanta. I want to specifically thank those on the team. As you know, no one does this by themselves. We have an amazing leader. Melody has just really taken this on. Melody Eccles is going to walk through the entire presentation with you. She's amazing and very accessible, and I want to thank her for all of her work. And then those at the back of the house, Michelle, Riley, and Keatris, thank you for your help. We make it all possible. So with that, I'm going to introduce Melody and say thank you for your partnership. Thank you for your support of small businesses. Together, we're going to make an impact. We were able to help over 800 businesses during Resurgence 1. We think with all of the programs that we're going to do with the ARP funds, all of them, and some of our other programs, for the first time in our history, we're going to be able to touch some sort of role, either with a grant, a loan, a technical assistance, to almost 15% of the city of Atlanta businesses. So super excited about what that will mean. But again, this call today is just to ensure you as our partner understand and can ask questions, because we know businesses are coming to you. So thank you very much. And Melody, all yours.
Thanks, Eloisa, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. As Eloisa mentioned, I'm Melody Eccles. I know several of you all, but for those of you I don't know, great to have you, and I'm happy to just walk through this presentation. As Eloisa mentioned, we're going to go through a lot of details of the application, really getting into line by line what we're going to ask for. As Eloisa mentioned again, we do suspect that a lot of our businesses will come to you for help, so it's just important for you all to have this information so that you can be helpful to them as well. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please drop them in the Q&A. Our team will do our best to answer them during the presentation, but if anything's left over, we'll have plenty of time at the end to have a Q&A session there. So I will share my screen and get to it. So today we'll go through a ton of information. Just first off, just the purpose of the grant program, what we're trying to do here. We'll get into the eligibility requirements, grant amounts, receipt requirements, get into some of what the eligible use of proceeds are, some compliance, documentation requirements, and then also, as Eloisa mentioned, we'll talk through some of just some helpful hints that you can share with the different businesses to ensure that they are providing a successful application. So we'll get into a little bit of those details as well. So first off, the whole purpose of the Resurgence Grant Fund is really to use federal COVID relief funding under the American Rescue Plan Act to provide reimbursable grants to our small businesses and nonprofits throughout the city. Invest Atlanta acknowledges, just the financial impact that our small businesses and nonprofits have faced over the past couple of years due to COVID. So really the goal is just that we use this grant funding to help alleviate some of that financial burden that they've experienced. For timeline, the mayor announced the relaunch a couple weeks back, and we started doing some educational webinars on the 15th and doing some direct outreach as well. We'll continue to have those webinars throughout the application process, but applications open this coming Tuesday, March 1st. and they'll be open through the month of March, month of April, and they close on April 29th. So we're hoping that leaving it open for a full 2 months will ensure that our businesses have plenty of time to submit their application, reach out if they have any questions or if they need some clarity on anything. We're trying to give them as much time as possible to be able to submit a successful application. Getting into eligibility, this round, both for-profits and nonprofits are eligible to apply. There are a few key differences in the eligibility criteria for each that I just wanted to note. So first, for-profits, in order to be eligible, the business must hold their 2022 City of Atlanta business license, as well as having less than 250 employees as of December 31st, 2021. We are asking our applicants to attest to having a financial hardship via an affidavit. I'll get into that a little bit more detailed when we go through the documentation required. We're also asking that our applicants attest that the expenses they're submitting for reimbursement under the Resurgence Grant Fund haven't already been covered by any other federal or just COVID relief funding. And again, I'll get into those details a little bit later as well. For nonprofits, it's generally the same. The only difference is really around the business license. We know that many nonprofits are not required to have their City of Atlanta business license. So if they are a nonprofit and they do, that's great. We will accept that. If they don't have their business license or they're not required to, we'll accept a 2022 City of Atlanta letter of good standing. And we're also asking for the nonprofit organization's IRS determination letter as well. And then the other points are the same as for-profits having less than 250 employees, attesting to having a financial hardship, and attesting that their expenses that they're submitting for reimbursement haven't already been covered by different funding sources. And a few notes on what sorts of businesses are ineligible. There's a full list of businesses that are ineligible on our website, but just to name a few, businesses that are engaged in illegal activity obviously are not eligible to apply. Corporate-owned franchises, life insurance companies, financial businesses, banks, loan packagers, things like that. Businesses located in a foreign country and government-owned entities, as well as businesses engaged in the adult business as defined by city code. Any businesses that are owned or operated by officials or employees or contractors of the City of Atlanta or Invest Atlanta are not eligible to apply. Any business that has previously defaulted on a City of Atlanta or Invest Atlanta loan, a grant, any other source of financing are also not eligible to apply for the grant program. So getting into the grant amounts and receipt requirements, grant amounts are up to $40,000. They are reimbursable and they can cover costs associated with COVID, the cost of business interruptions due to COVID. And we'll go over exact line by line what eligible expenses are in a few slides. But since they are reimbursable, we are required to ask applicants to provide receipts and proofs of payment for the expenses that they're asking for reimbursement. Receipts can be from March 3rd, 2021 and later, so it's almost a full year worth of eligible expenses incurred. And acceptable proofs of payment, I wanted to outline here. It's important that the invoices and receipts are dated March 3rd, 2021 or later. That date has to be visible. We have to ensure that it's the eligible time period. If the invoice or receipt doesn't indicate that it's paid, then we have to then see proof of payment. So if it's an invoice that just has the total on it, but it doesn't show that it was actually paid, we'll have to see proof of payment either with a canceled check if it was paid with a check. If it was a wire transfer, we'll have to see that confirmation, or we can see the credit card or bank statement as well. A lot of times, people use payment apps, Cash App, Zelle, Venmo, PayPal, things like that. That's totally fine. We'll just have to see screenshots of those payment confirmations as well. Again, making sure that the date is visible, the amount is visible, and the payment status says paid. I do also want to note that it's important that these receipts are itemized. We have to obviously see what exactly the expense was to determine if it is an eligible expense. If an applicant is requesting payroll to be reimbursed, then we'll have to see timesheets or payroll records. and if an applicant is requesting reimbursement for commercial rent or mortgage. In addition to that proof of payment, we'll also need to see a copy of a fully executed and current commercial lease. I do want to emphasize that this lease must be current. So oftentimes, an applicant will provide their original lease and say that they entered into this lease in 2015 and it was an initial 2-year term. So that lease obviously expired in 2017. We would then have to see those lease renewals up to the eligible reimbursement period. So if a business you're working with or is requesting to be reimbursed for those commercial rent payments, then making sure that they're reaching out to their landlords and seeing if they can get a copy of that renewal. And it must be signed by both the business owner and the landlord. So what expenses are eligible for reimbursement? Again, emphasizing the date March 3rd, 2021 is when expenses can start. Anytime after that. And it's really anything COVID related. I'll go line by line for what sort of categories we have that are eligible. But at the end of the day, we know that businesses are all nuanced and have their own things going on that they may be aware of that we just wouldn't think. So if it's anything that the business owner had to incur due to COVID and it was necessary due to COVID, it's potentially eligible for reimbursement. But just to go line by line of the categories, first being purchase or lease of machinery and equipment or modifications to existing equipment, anything that was necessary due to COVID. Also purchase of PPE, sanitation, disinfection, if a business invested in a professional disinfection, or if masks, gloves, hand sanitizer, things like that. Anything that kind of falls in that category is eligible. Rent or mortgage payments, again, emphasizing that this is commercial rent or mortgage payments. We do allow home-based businesses to apply. However, we cannot reimburse them for their rent or mortgage or their utilities if they're a home-based business. So it has to be commercial space. Payroll and benefits costs are eligible through March 31st, 2022. If a business has any costs to retain their employees, utilities costs, other operating costs, again, utilities costs only for commercial spaces. If a business implemented any COVID-19 prevention or mitigation tactics, this could be kind of creative. This can be if a business had to build out their space or reconfigure their space to adhere to social distancing. They had to invest in sort of plexiglass barriers, or even if a business had to invest in some sort of technology in order to, utilize touchless payments, or if they had to create a virtual presence during COVID, those sorts of things are eligible for reimbursement. Similarly, any investment in technical assistance or counseling or other services that were provided to assist the business with planning through COVID, that is potentially eligible as well. And then finally, we just have an other necessary expenditures category. This is to the point I was making earlier. Different businesses have different nuances that we may not be aware of. So if there's any expense that a business says, I could not have gone through COVID without incurring this expense, that would fall into that category. And we may ask for, just some point of clarification just so that we understand what the need was there. But that's what that other category is. So getting into compliance requirements, again, this is a grant, it's not a loan, but we do ask our applicants for just a few pieces of compliance. First being that they use best efforts to at least retain or expand their current levels of employment. We also ask that within 1 year of receiving the grant funds that the grantee use their best efforts to complete at least 15 hours of community service with a 501c3 organization within the city. We leave this open. We don't have a list of preferred organizations to work with, hoping that makes it a little bit easier on our applicants to just pick a 501c3 of their choice. If the applicant is a 501c3 organization, we ask that they spend their 15 hours of community service with a different 501c3 organization. We also ask within 1 year of receiving the funds that our grantees submit to us an annual progress report. And this will be attached to their grant agreement so that they have the questions ahead of time. But it's really just getting into, what are your, how many employees do you have? Are you able to expand or retain that level? What's your revenue looking like? How has the funding helped you? It's really just, to see how the funds have impacted our businesses. And it's also just keeping us accountable to make sure that the funds are reaching the goals that we've intended with the program. And that'll be sent out electronically so that a business can complete it online, and the responses will be submitted to us automatically. And then again, asking the applicant to attest to having financial hardships, asking the applicant to attest that they'll use the fund to implement COVID-19 prevention or mitigation tactics, and asking the applicant to attest that they haven't already received funds for the same expenses that they're asking to be reimbursed through this program. And I'll get into these in a second with the documentation requirements. So similarly to the eligibility requirements, the documentation requirements differ a little bit for for-profits and nonprofits, mostly around the business license, but I'll just go line by line. And I want to spend a bit of time on this piece just because this is the section of the application that really consumes the most time. It's a lot of important documentation that we do review pretty closely. So first, for for-profits, we're going to ask for a driver's license or some other government issued ID of an authorized representative of the business. It's important that with this ID that the applicant redact if it's a driver's license, the driver's license number or whatever ID number, we ask that they redact that along with their birth date. We don't want to have any of the applicant's personal identifiable information in our system, so that's why we ask for that redaction. We're asking for payroll documentation as of December 31st, 2021, and this is to ensure that a business, in fact, had less than 250 employees. So even if a business is not requesting payroll to be reimbursed, we still ask for their payroll documentation for December 31st, 2021 to just ensure the employee count. This can be a Form 941 or it can be detailed payroll journals just reflecting the number of employees. We're asking our for-profits to provide their 2022 City of Atlanta business license. We're aware that it does take a bit of time for the physical license to reach the business. So as long as the applicant has paid for their 2022 business license and can provide confirmation that they did pay for that license, then that's fine. They can just submit that screenshot confirmation and we can go on to the City of Atlanta's online portal and we can verify that their fees have in fact been paid. We are actually working with the Department of Revenue to have a webinar next week specifically on the business licenses to help walk them through how the portal works, and if they have to renew their license, then they can they'll be shown how to do that and have an opportunity to ask any questions as well. We're asking for the 2022 Secretary of State annual registration. This is required for limited partnerships, corporations, and LLCs. So if the business has not done that yet, it's important that they get their Secretary of State annual registration for 2022. Because we're a government entity, we're asking for a SAVE affidavit. It's just a one-page affidavit. It must be completed by an authorized representative and notarized. We're asking for a W-9 form with the EIN number. Asking for a certificate designating authorized grantee representative that must be notarized. And this is really just a simple one-page form that we've created that really just ensures that the person who is signing the grant agreement is in fact an authorized representative of the business. So we just ask for some specimen signatures and just noting who in fact is authorized to sign on behalf of the business. We're asking for a duplication of benefits certification and supporting documentation. This is probably the most important document and the one that we will spend the most time reviewing. It really wasn't until Treasury started or until all these COVID relief fundings came about that Treasury realized they had to ensure that that businesses weren't tapping into different funds to cover the same expenses. So this goes along with asking our businesses to attest that they are in fact not doing that. And to ensure it, we're asking that they complete the certification that asks them to declare what other sorts of COVID relief funding that they've received in 2021, and asking them how much they've gotten and what they've spent it on. We will ask for supporting documentation to go along with it and verify it. So for example, if a business received a PPP loan in March of last year and they used it to cover their March through December payroll expenses, then we will ask them to declare that. We'll ask them to provide their PPP loan document, their agreement. We'll ask them to provide proof that the funds were received. That can just be a screenshotted bank statement showing that the funds made it to their account. And then we're going to ask to see proof that the funds were expended. So if they say that they spent it on payroll for March through December, then we'll have to see verification with a payroll journal, or so, however they can provide proof of that payroll payment. And then what we will do is then ensure that they aren't submitting those same payroll expenses to be reimbursed through the Resurgence Grant Fund. So that's the analysis we're doing on our end. As I said, this is probably the piece of documentation that we're going to spend the most time on, and the grantee will probably spend the most time on putting it together. The financial hardship affidavit that also must be notarized. This is an affidavit that we created, just a simple one page, asking the applicant to attest that they did experience a financial hardship due to COVID. And this is in lieu of us having to ask for any financial documentation. You'll notice we're not asking for any profit and loss statements. We're not asking for financial projections. We're not asking the applicant to prove that they had a financial loss. What Invest Atlanta has done is we've gathered several different sources of data to support the fact that all small businesses and nonprofits within the city of Atlanta have been financially impacted by COVID as a whole. So we were able to create that case for the entire program so that all eligible applicants are just considered to have experienced a financial loss. We are asking for just a little bit extra compliance comfort that they signed this affidavit attesting to that. And then finally, if an applicant is submitting commercial rent receipts for reimbursements, in addition to those proofs of payment, we're asking for a copy of a current and fully executed commercial lease, emphasizing again that this must be up to date. It has to be for the period of time in which they're asking for reimbursement, and it must be signed by both parties, by the business owner and the landlord. And then for nonprofits, as I mentioned, it's generally the same except for the business license. So if a nonprofit does have their business license, then that's great. They can submit that, or they can submit their 2022 letter of good standing in lieu of that. Similarly, with the Secretary of State registration, only nonprofits that are corporations are required to register with the Secretary of State. So if a nonprofit is a corporation, they should provide that. If not, we won't require it. And we're also asking for the nonprofit organization's IRS determination letter. All of the other documents are the same as for-profit, so I won't go through them again, but they are here for clarity's sake. And I do want to mention that every piece of documentation that's required is provided on our website. I'll have a link to the website on the last slide, but we have all blank templates available that businesses can go and begin downloading and completing those so that they're ready at the point when applications open on Tuesday. And then finally, just on reviewing applications, we are going to review them as they're submitted. Again, the applications are open from March 1st until April 29th. So as they come in, we're going to start reviewing them. Once the application period closes and all applications are reviewed for eligibility, then all eligible applicants will be scored with a pretty robust scoring matrix to determine grant amounts. But they will be reviewed as they are submitted. And so really just the sooner an applicant can get an application in, the more time there is for, just conversation if there needs to be some clarification on one of their answers, or if they're missing a piece of documentation. It just provides a little bit more time and flexibility for us to have those conversations the sooner that they get the applications in. And then I have some helpful hints. Here's a few points that I wanted to share with you all. So as you're speaking with businesses in your network, in your community, that these points here will just help the application process on our end, and will help them have a more successful application. First being that they provide thoughtful narratives. Last round, it was a struggle a little bit to understand really what the impact was on their business. We didn't last round we didn't require a minimum character amount for those narratives. So a lot of times, applicants would just provide less than a sentence to explain how COVID impacted them, and it just really wasn't helpful for our scoring committee to figure out what the impact was. So this round, we did include a minimum character amount. So hopefully that urges them to provide a little bit more information. But if they could just take the time, we really only ask less than, I think, 2 or 3 narrative type questions, just asking what the impact COVID had on your business was, and what are your plans for your business to thrive and survive during COVID. It's really the only 2 questions. And if they could just provide thoughtful narratives, it would help the review process so much. Also, I alluded to this a little bit, but providing current documents. I do anticipate that a lot of applicants will try to utilize the same documents that they used for the last grant funding. So specifically like the W-9 or the SAVE affidavit, those types of documents, they need to be current. So having to refill out the SAVE affidavit and get it notarized sometime recently, where our reviewers will make sure that it's notarized and signed sometime in 2022. So just making sure that they take the time to get those current documents. And again, all the documents are available to download on our website. If you go to investatlanta.com, there's a big blue update box right on the home page that has a link that brings you to the Resurgence Grant Fund landing page. It has a ton of information, including links to download all of those documents. The next is that they use the same and consistent legal business name on all documents, and at any point in the application where we ask for the legal business name. This is important because we ensure consistency on all the documents for audit purposes, and also we utilize what business name is inputted in the application to populate their grant agreement. And the grant agreement must have the legal business name in order for it to just be valid. And this is down to, the comma, LLC, the INC period, capital letters, lowercase letters, just making sure that it is in fact the legal business name as appears on Secretary of State, as appears on the business license. So just making sure that it's consistent on the W-9, on the duplication of benefits document, on the application, just urging them to making sure that they are consistent with providing what their legal business name is. Next is making sure that receipts are clear and that proof of payment is evident. In addition to reviewing the duplication of benefits, that's going to take a lot of time, but the receipt review is going to be the biggest task on our application processors for sure. We really need to ensure each eligible expense. So making sure that it's itemized, making sure that the date is clear, making sure if it's not evident that it's paid, that they can provide additional proof. If it's an invoice that has the total amount, but it doesn't show that it's paid, then providing that bank statement or that credit card statement or canceled check to supplement it. Or if it's not super clear what the expense actually was, or maybe it's just unclear how it relates to COVID, just providing that additional clarity is just going to be super helpful as we're reviewing receipts, and it will eliminate the amount of back and forth between our receipt reviewers and the applicants. And then, as I mentioned, just not waiting to the last minute to apply. As I said, we're reviewing applications as they come in, and just the sooner that they're in, the more time that the processors have and our application reviewers have to have some conversation with the applicants if needed, will be super helpful in making sure that the process is moving smoothly. And I did want to mention too, all of this information is available on our website. Again, going to investatlanta.com, clicking that link to the Resurgence landing page has so much information. It has a program overview. There's an FAQ document that we're constantly updating as we're having more webinars and seeing more common questions. There's a link to all the documents to download, as well as just a list of what is required. There's also links to webinars that we've had in the past. And there's a live chat feature too. If you want to chat with one of Invest Atlanta's representatives during business hours, you can utilize that. We also have a customer service email, resurgence@investatlanta.com. I personally keep an eye on this email pretty regularly. I try to clear the inbox every couple of days, but we are responsive to that. So if there's any sort of nuanced or detailed question, I would urge businesses to email it to resurgence@investatlanta.com. We do our best to answer, and if any clarification is needed in the question, I'm happy to jump on a call with the business just to make sure I understand their question. We will have additional webinars throughout the application process, so stay tuned for those. And as I mentioned, webinar recordings are available at investatlanta.com and also on Invest Atlanta's Facebook page. I believe that is it. So I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any in the Q&A box. But as we do that, I will leave this page open just so you all have a chance to jot down that email address and get that link. So I'll look to my Invest Atlanta team here. Do we have any questions that need to be addressed?
So we have one question. How should the loss of food be documented for reimbursement?
The loss of what? I'm sorry.
The loss of food?
Loss of food. So loss of food is not an eligible expense for reimbursement unless there's some sort of nuance I'm missing on that. There's a list of what expenses are ineligible also on the website. I urge you to take a look at that as well. Loss of expected revenue is ineligible. Debt payments are ineligible, things like that. So if I'm understanding the question correctly, I would say that that is an ineligible expense.
Okay, and then we have another question. What will be shared in the next sessions that hasn't been shared here?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we are going to have a webinar next week to specifically walk through the business license portal. That'll be information. I also plan to have an additional session that walks through the documentation piece by piece to give pointers on what exactly we're looking for in reviewing the documentation, and just specific questions on the application. Once it's live and once everyone can view the application, then we can have those webinars that really get into each individual question. So I would just expect even more detail on how we're looking at the documents and what we're looking for to ensure that it's valid.
We have another question. Can an authorized representative represent multiple businesses?
Yes, so that is definitely allowed. As long as each individual business has its own separate business license and is a separate entity that's registered separately, then yes, you can submit an application for each one. You can't combine them all into one application. You'll have to submit a separate one for each entity.
We have another question. If we have an SVO grant that is burning off over a similar time frame, can we allocate some of our pay rate increases for our lower paid employees to retain them to this grant and exclude from the SVO grant?
That was a lot. Sorry, I think that was.
Yeah, that was a long question.
If that person could please send that question to the resurgence@investatlanta.com email address, just so I can digest it and make sure I answer correctly, that would be great. Thank you.
Someone else asked if you can reiterate the dates of the covered period.
Yeah, so covered period is March 3rd, 2021 through the time that they submit their application. So 3rd, 2021 is the most important date there.
We don't have any other questions at this time.
Okay. We have just another second, but yeah, if there are any other additional questions that pop up, again, please email them to the resurgence@investatlanta.com email address. I'm not kidding when I say I check it at least every other day, and I do my best to be responsive to that. So if any other questions pop up, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to jump on a call if needed. if it's not just a quick question, but just keep another eye. But yeah, if there are no other questions, then thank you all so much for joining us. I hope this information was helpful. And again, just stay tuned for additional webinars. We post all of our updates on social media. If you're not subscribed to our newsletter, that's also posted there as well. So, and we're always here if you have any additional questions or thoughts or want to chat about anything. But thank you all so much, and I hope you have a great weekend.